Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and it's a pleasure to be here with Ariana Dunne. Ariana, you're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself and give people a little bit of context to the world of Ariana Dunne.
My goodness, well, where to start? I suppose, thank you so much for having me on, Simon. You came across me recently when I was a guest on the 6 o'clock show, which is a TV show here in Ireland, talking about my podcast, Solo Powered, and talking in general about kind of the concept of solo living and attitudes towards single people and ways in which we can all live extraordinary lives doing things by ourselves without waiting for other people to come along. So I suppose that's the context of how I find myself here today. So I'm a podcaster. I'm a new podcaster. I started my podcast back in March, called Solo Powered. But I suppose going backwards, I spent about 20 years working in the media industry. So I graduated with a degree in international journalism, worked for a small time as a journalist before selling my soul to the devil and going down the creative advertising route. So I kind of combined my editorial skills with sales skills, something that I was always quite good at. I had my first job when I was about 13 and I worked in kind of the hospitality industry, and always loved the idea of being able to convince people to part with their money for pleasure or for things that benefit them. So I was working for the Irish Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday as a supplements and features manager. So basically it was my job to come up with an idea for a supplement and sell it to an advertiser. But I also used my journalism skills and editorial skills to create the entire supplement from start to finish. So I would maybe, for an example, would come up with an idea for a travel supplement, and I would sell the advertising to travel companies. But then I would commission journalists to write the content and create a sort of an advertorial type supplement that would be then distributed with the Irish Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. So I was doing that when I was 24, and nobody really looked over the editorial. I had a lot of trust bestowed upon me at that time, but I brought in quite a lot of money into the organization, just coming up with ideas and effectively selling nothing. So that was a really nice introduction to me into the world of media sales, that you can actually sell nothing because I didn't have anything to show anyone other than some figures and some numbers, and would create things from scratch. So it was a beautiful entry into the world of media and media sales. So from there, after several years working with them, I went over to London, over into the UK, worked for Bauer Media in creative solutions across all of the men's and entertainment brands like FHM and Empire, Q, Kerrang, Mojo. It was a very fun time, which mostly involved drinking in the office and taking clients out for expensive meals and having a lovely time, whilst also selling advertising. And I also worked for The Spectator magazine, which was Boris Johnson's old magazine, so a real Tory, very much a recognised political magazine that's been around since the 1800s, which was an interesting time, with Andrew Neil as my chairman in there, who presents the politics show on BBC. And then I worked for Dennis Publishing, so another great and interesting company started by Felix Dennis. And then I came back to Ireland and I worked as the head of sales for Joe.ie and Her.ie, and worked there for a time of massive growth within the company. We launched Joe.co.uk in the time that I was there, and during that time, probably mostly because of my victim of my own success, I suffered burnout during that time. So I was there for a year and decided to leave and rethink my career and what it is that I wanted to do with it. So I took some time out. I went to the south of France to write a book, to a retreat. I went to LA, and I, during that time, decided that I actually really would like to work for myself. And I had lots of different things that I was interested in, lots of different passions that I had. And I decided to sort of retrain, and I retrained as a life coach and a career coach. I retrained as a celebrant, and I kind of used a lot of the contacts and things like that I have to work in the world of consulting, lecturing, training. And yeah, so I came back after that time, and during that time decided to retrain. I worked as CCO for Mummy Pages, which is a parenting website here in Ireland. And during that time, kind of got all my ducks in a row, bought my apartment, did all the things that you need to do before you take the big plunge of going out and working for yourself. And for the past 6 years, I've been what I self-describe as a multi-hyphenate. So I have multiple different income streams, doing lots of things that I'm good at and passionate about that help other people and allow me to live the life I want to lead. So so that's the brief history of my career thus far.
I'm out of breath just listening to you. That's an awful lot. And do you know, it's great though, because you really are shining a light on the modern way of working today, because you mentioned multiple income streams. That's really important to people in today's world. And I suppose our parents' generation, or even our grandparents' generation, where you kind of worked at one or two places your entire life, and that was kind of it, if you were lucky to work. And I think today people are deciding the life that they want to lead, how they want to work, how they want their income to come to them. But I must say, when you made the move initially to London, you certainly did hit a lot of the big advertising names, the big publishing names. I mean, The Spectator and Felix Dennis, for example, two really big brands in the London publishing industry. And of course, the others that you mentioned. But that must have been was that a learning experience? Did you learn a lot there?
Yeah, I mean, you know what, it's funny because I think, you know, what you touched upon there in terms of the different skill sets that I have, that was always something that I struggled with early on in my career, in the sense of I trained as a journalist and I was really interested in writing. But even when I was training as a journalist, I was being told by my lecturers that I was more of a creative writer, that I was studying the wrong degree. And I was in my head thinking that I was doing journalism because I thought that's where the, you know, the money would be. And then when I decided to go into journalism, I saw there wasn't very much much money, even less money in journalism than there would be in creative writing necessarily. And so I went down the advertising route. But during my time of going for interviews and things like that, I would always be sort of battled with by the people interviewing me, saying like, are you a journalist or are you a salesperson? Like, pick a lane. And I was kind of like, well, I don't want to pick a lane. I can be multiple things. People can have multiple talents and multiple skills. And I think it was really interesting when I worked in the Daily Mail, because I landed on my feet there. I was able to use a lot of my different skills, and I managed an entire department. I launched You magazine into the Irish market. I had people reporting into me. So when I moved to the UK, which obviously is such a bigger market, we're dealing in much bigger revenue streams, much bigger organizations, there wasn't that much freedom for me to use a lot of my skills. So I found when you go and work in the UK for big organizations, they really want you to stay in your lane, and they want you to kind of like sit there and do what is asked of you. And I would always be like, but I can also do this and also do this. And I was always sort of fighting against I remember one time when I worked in Dennis, my manager bringing me in and saying, you know, that I was in 7th gear and I needed to bring it back to 5th gear. And I remember thinking what terrible advice that was to give to someone. But it was because I was always just kind of wanting more and more and more. So that was a learning curve in that sense, in the sense of me trying to kind of pull back a little bit and you know, I suppose temper down my desire to be ambitious and to do more. And it was, you know, definitely a sort of a learning curve in that regard. But yeah, absolutely. It was an incredible time to work in media. There was a recession in Ireland, so I kind of left at the best time to move to London and to work for all of these incredible brands where money was really no object. And I managed to work for organizations that, you know, handsomely rewarded good salespeople. And so I had a lovely time working on some fantastic brands and meeting an incredible array of brilliant, talented people across the media landscape in London. So it was brilliant.
Yeah, and I suppose that I mean, you nearly 5 years with the Daily Mail group, and
Mm.
launching, as you mentioned, the You magazine publication. I know you were responsible for pretty much all of the advertising you know, at the early stage of that development, and that was a
Mm.
huge launch.
Mm.
And you said earlier that, you know, you kind of like you were bringing money in, you were kind of allowed to do things, and you had that real free reign. So it must have been quite a transition when you move to somewhere where you're kind of boxed in a little bit or in that lane a little bit. I can understand that.
Yeah, and we were, but I mean, I was kind of clever in the sense that I worked in the creative solutions department. So I was working always in a creative kind of capacity. And then I was also kind of moving and transitioning from publishing world into the more digital world at the time when it was still really quite new. And it was before words like programmatic or native or anything like that was even being bandied around. So I was able to kind of constantly keep my brain active by learning new skills within the industry itself, and kind of becoming or trying to become an expert in various fields at times when they were sort of becoming popular. So it was kind of keeping an eye on what was trending, I suppose, and kind of positioning myself into areas that I felt, that I would be interested in as well.
Yeah, there was no AI back then to help you
No,
pull a story together or pull some
definitely
creative
not.
together. Yeah. And what about today then? So bring us up to today, because you mentioned these different income streams. I know you're a lecturer. I know you have various businesses, and of course, we need to talk about the podcast.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like I say, because of the fact that I suffered burnout, I wanted to do something that allowed me to help people who were like me, I suppose, people who wanted to maybe transition from doing jobs that they no longer felt passionate about, and wanted to kind of do something on their own or just do things differently. And I think throughout my career, people would constantly come to me seeking advice. So I would often get people messaging me, even within the agency world, clients of mine, who would say, "Are you free for a coffee next week?" And I'd think that they wanted to meet to talk about a campaign, but they would actually be meeting me to say that they maybe were thinking about leaving their job, and what did I think, and where should they go, and did I have any like contacts? So I was definitely kind of a person that people felt comfortable coming to for advice. And I decided that the world of coaching, again, I suppose, was a new upcoming area, and it afforded me the opportunity to kind of use different skills to kind of help people live the life that they wanted to live, because I had been so fortunate in being able to create the life that I wanted to lead. So yeah, coaching is very much an area that I'm in. I had the very fortunate experience of being a student that became the master, in the sense that I trained as a life coach with a company called Mindstream back 6 years ago. And I, during that time, my life changed as a result of doing this life-changing course. And I subsequently kind of went back to the owner after I graduated and said that, suggested, as I would often do, because I don't have a filter sometimes, that the marketing module was a bit outdated. And I felt that maybe the marketing module of how to launch your business could maybe be improved. And did he want me to potentially teach a module on the course, which he graciously accepted. And subsequently, I've then gone on to become the chief facilitator, teaching coaching to other students, so teaching the diploma and the certificate course that I did. And from August, I will actually own the company, because Sean Farrell, who started the company 22 years ago, is retiring, and he's passing the company on to me. So I'm very excited about the prospect of continuing on his sort of legacy and training other people to be life coaches, to help people live their life and to achieve their goals. And potentially expanding that into the corporate world as well, and working with companies to try and help people to be better managers by being better coaches and coaching teams as opposed to managing teams, which I think could definitely increase productivity and definitely increase a sense of ownership of a person's role within a company. So there's some things that I'm doing, but I also teach digital marketing with a couple of universities here, such as the Fitzwilliam Institute, the Digital Marketing Academy of Ireland. I trained as a celebrant, so I marry people and perform baby naming ceremonies. I work with Irish Country magazine 2 days per week as their advertising director, and I have a life coaching column within the magazine as well. And then I have my podcast, and yeah, I train and I do consulting for companies as well. So a lot of different things, but people are like, what, where do you have the time to do all of that? But I do a little bit of everything, right? So I'm not doing everything full time, and I'm picking and choosing what I do. And also, when you work for yourself, you have 168 hours in the week and 7 days a week and 365 days of the year in which to decide when you're going to work. So it's different from kind of the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday mindset. You kind of work different hours to fulfill the different things that you want to do.
And can I ask you an important question that springs to mind here, just about this big, I mean, it's a big transformation, it's a big change, but you've mentioned burnout a few times.
Mm.
And that was kind of, it sort of, you moved, you had to move, you decided to take time out, you traveled, etc. And how do you prevent that from happening again now? Because a lot of people who work for themselves listening to this around the world will know that when you work for yourself, the hours can be longer, the pay can be worse, the stress can be just as bad as it was when you were in the corporate world. So how do you manage that today? It must be very different the way it's set up today, because obviously it sounds like you're doing more than ever, just to the casual listener.
Yeah, but you know what? I think I'm lazy as hell. So like, I mean, I'm always often berating myself because feel like I'm not doing enough. Because I suppose, to answer your question, because I'm a coach, it's important that I practice what I preach. And because I experienced burnout and didn't want to experience it again, I, asked myself a question very early on in this journey, which is what is enough and what is too much. And it's something that I work with a lot of my coaching clients on, who are also thinking about potentially transitioning or starting their own businesses, is that we have to understand that there is always going to be a point when we work too much or we earn too much money. And sometimes when we're entering into working for ourselves, we're just thinking we have to say yes to everything and we have to let all of the money come in and we have to, grow. But for me, I really early on realized that actually money isn't the thing that makes you happy. It's very often the least thing on the priority of making you happy. For me personally, quality time, having time to do and choose the things that I want to do, and having enough money for me to live the life I want to lead. So I know that I can turn away work if I need to, because I have enough money there to pay my mortgage, pay my bills, put food on the table, like look after my mom, like go on a couple of holidays a year. That's all that I need. I don't need to have millions or thousands in the bank. In fact, I don't want to. And it's an argument that I have with people. My brother often berates me and says I could be earning much more money than I am. But for me, that doesn't give me the freedom that I have now. And the life that I live now is the life that I'm choosing to live, that affords me the opportunity to do things that I want to do, make money and not make money, and be free to travel around Europe, which is what I did last year. So I spent the whole year solo traveling around Europe with my little dog Molly, and I would spend many days just at the beach or climbing mountains. And sometimes I didn't have very much money in my bank at all, but I'd be in Lake Como going, well, it doesn't matter because I'm in Lake Como, so it's fine. I don't have thousands in the bank, but I have this amazing memory that I'm creating, and creating lots of experiences, which is what I value in terms of my life. So I suppose that's an important message for people, is that we have to understand what is enough and what is too much.
I think it's a great point, because often people end up working themselves crazy hours, collecting more money, and then getting to the end of their life and thinking, well, this isn't quite the life I wanted, or
Yeah.
if
Or
only I'd
waiting for
done that.
retirement when you could be living your retirement life now,
Yeah,
like I feel like I'm semi-retired, even though I'm only just turned 41. But like, I mean, this is what I'm doing now. I mean, I'm thinking about getting into politics. I launched a podcast in March. I'm always kind of like, what are other things that I can do? I'm a bit of a magpie like that. But a lot of people sometimes struggle with that. Some people that I meet on nights out, if I'm meet someone from a past life, or someone who I met into school, or someone who I knew from the agency world, they'll say, Ariana, I can't keep up with you. Everything on LinkedIn, you're doing all these different things. And I'm like, yeah. And they say, but like, what are you focused on? What's the one thing? And I just always reply and say that I'm focused on making money, doing things that I want to do, and living the life I want to lead. That's it. You don't have to pick a lane. You don't have to choose one thing. You don't have to, put yourself into a box and stay there for the rest of your life. We have an amazing world now where we can choose lots of different paths, and explore as many different routes in order to live the most full life that we can possibly live.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think the difference is you're doing what you want to do now as opposed to what you have to do. And that comes across. And you're obviously passionate about being able to choose the things that you want to do and travel when you need to do and make money when you need to do. And I think that's a very modern way. And there's more and more people moving into that, you know. So whether one minute you're sort of looking after things for Irish Country Magazine, another well-known title and publication, or you're coaching, you know, and you take it on a new, well, you're carrying on a legacy of a business, and you're sort of reinventing that, I'm sure, and you've got some exciting plans for that. And the podcast. So tell me about the guests that you've had on the podcast, and tell me how the world of podcast is treating you, because some people set up a podcast thinking, oh, this is going to be a breeze, and then they suddenly realize how much work's involved behind the scenes. But you, coming from the media landscape and with your background, you know all about producing creative content. So how did you go about setting it up and launching it, and how is it going, and what type of people are you having on the show?
Yeah, so the podcast, I guess, again, practicing what I preach, one of the things that I've done for the past few years since becoming a coach and looking at goal setting is deciding different things that I want to do at the end of every year or the beginning of every year. And last year it was about travel, and it was about traveling all across Europe and doing all of that, which I can touch on later. But the podcast at the end of the year, I was like coming home to Ireland, and I was worried that I was going to get super depressed after having this incredible year traveling all around. And I wanted to make sure that I set myself another clear set of goals to achieve. So one of the things that I wrote down was that I wanted to do more podcast work, more radio work, more TV work, and more public speaking, so more guest speaking slots. So that was an ambition that I had for me in terms of developing myself. And as is the power of the law of attraction and, you know, putting thought into action, within 3 weeks of me writing that down, I was a guest on the Ryan Tubridy show, which obviously is one of the biggest radio shows in Ireland. And I went on as a guest talking about my solo travel experience. And I got a really good response and a fantastic reception from that interview. People that I never even met were like, oh, I heard you on the radio, you know. So it was really great. And then as a result of that, I had lots and lots of messages from people saying, you know, Ariana, you were really great and you have a really good voice and you should start a podcast, right? So interestingly, I had actually had the idea for Solo Powered back in August when I was in Italy, and I had actually registered Solo Powered, the name, on Acast, and I completely forgot all about it. So it was very funny when I actually started again. I was like, oh, it's there already. So Solo Powered became this idea of actually promoting the idea of being able to do things on your own, whether that be solo business, solopreneurism, solo travel, having a baby on your own, being single by choice, solo adventures, and solo pursuits of passion. So that's really the kind of the six different themes. And I suppose it's sort of based off of me, because I don't solo travel. I bought an apartment by myself. I'm single by choice. I'm thinking about having a baby on my own. I've launched a lot of my own businesses. And I suppose I wanted to meet and talk to other people that had also done those types of things. So far, so I obviously, you know, I don't have much by way of podcasting experience, but I have a lot of connections within the media world. So Cassie Delaney, who I worked with in Joe.ie and Her.ie, who owns Tall Tale Podcast and subsequently now Outcaster, which she's just launched. She's very involved in creating and producing wonderful podcasts here in Ireland. So I reached out to her and I just said, I have an idea and I'd love to talk to you about it. And she loved it. And she very graciously offered to produce the podcast for me. So I would just go into her studio and I booked a lot of guests, and I would just book out a studio slot with her. All I do is interview the people, and Cassie produces it for me. So I was very, very fortunate in that way. And some of the guests that I've had on, I've had, you know, Connor Clear, who was the former TV3 weatherman. He went on a solo Antarctic solo trip to Antarctica, but he also has his own business and is also single by choice. So a lot of people have multiple solo stories. I had Callie Shatter, who creates one-woman plays and also has her own business in comedy improv. I had Gordon Hickey, who has his own business, Container Coffee. He wanted to become an actor, so he decided to write, direct, star, and produce his own short films, which went on to be listed in short film festivals around the world. I've had Louise McSharry, who has her own very successful podcast after leaving RTE. I've had Clodagh O'Hagan, who had a baby on her own. I've had Phoebe Foran from Forager, who, you know, everything has a theme in terms of trying to encourage the listener to do things on their own. So whether that be go for a walk on your own, go to the cinema on your own, go for a meal on your own, start a business on your own, have a baby on your own, just embracing the idea that we don't need to wait for someone else to come and help us live our life. We have the power ourselves to live the life that we want to lead.
Yeah, and you also covered, didn't you, a bit about Damien Brown, who was very, very famously decided to row the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And there
Yeah,
were
so
two of them originally, but Damien ended up on his own for that trip.
absolutely. So Damien rowed solo rowed the Atlantic in 63 days in 2017, and then he decided to do it again, but this time coming from New York to Galway, so coming the other way. And he was supposed to do it with his friend who got an injury 13 days in, and originally they wanted to try and break the world record, but in the end, Damien continued on the journey on his own and did it in 112 days. So that was an incredibly inspiring story. And I was very fortunate that I reached out to Damien and he just agreed to come on the podcast on like a day that he happened to be in Ireland, because he actually lives in Australia. And yeah, hearing his story about tropical storms and breaking oars and spending, 52 days with dolphin pods, or spending 84 hours in a cabin trying to prevent himself from dying during a tropical storm was absolutely eye-opening and hugely inspirational. But yeah, they're the kinds of things that I wanted to get across, that a lot of people would think that solo rowing the Atlantic is a crazy endeavor, and absolutely it is. But all I want you to do as a listener is to go for a walk on your own, or go to the cinema on your own. And I think hearing those types of extreme stories would hopefully inspire more people to be able to be comfortable with their time in their own company, which a lot of people aren't. And that's the sort of the narrative that I'm hearing from people, that they're terrified of doing things on their own.
It's interesting, isn't it, as well? And podcasting seems to be almost the perfect medium for you, because you have that you have that listener on their own. You're going directly into here, and you're really just literally talking into their ear. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And that sort of area that you're talking around, whether it's a previous sort of media contact, or somebody who's been very high profile in Irish media, for example, or somebody who's rowed the Atlantic under very extreme conditions. They are wonderful journeys. But tell us a little bit about your own travel as well, because I don't want to miss that, because we've mentioned it a little bit.
It's funny as well, though, just to kind of touch on what you said there. I think a really important thing, which I think is important to mention as well, in terms of someone starting out on their own, working in a business, is your network, and making sure that you are confident in the network of people that you have and the people that you can turn to for support. I think it's something that I, really worked on throughout my career, because I worked in so many different places, and I was always friendly and kind and worked hard and was conscious about the people that I was working with, in terms of not creating bad relationships with people. And I think that's just an important thing, that it's very difficult to start out in business when you don't have that type of network. So just in relation to the guests, I mean, a lot of the guests that I have had on the podcast are actually generally like friends of mine, and I remember a girl who I work with in the office sort of said, do you have any friends that are just called Mary, who have 3 kids and work work in a shop, because all of your friends seem to just have these incredible stories. And I was like, yeah, I suppose it's just interesting that I probably collect wonderful people that I have met over the years, who have interesting stories to tell. But yeah, in terms of my own travel, I suppose when COVID happened and our wings got clipped and we weren't able to go anywhere, it really terrified me, I'll be honest. I have a really big family. I'm one of 8 kids, and we live all over the world. So I have family in Paris and Los Angeles and Brisbane and Cyprus and Tahoe. And the idea of us being kind of like locked down literally was not something that I ever thought would happen. And no one did, I suppose. But it really just gave me this hunger to see more of the world and to experience more cultures. And when restrictions lifted, I own my own apartment, and I just thought, I can rent it out, and all of my work had gone remote, and thankfully things like Zoom came into our stratosphere, and I was able to do coaching, and I was still able to sell, and work proved that I could work not in the office, and do all of the things that I needed to do. So I just thought, rather than look out the window in Lucan in Dublin, as lovely as it is, I thought I can look out the window in Paris and Lisbon and Marbella and Venice, or wherever it was. So I decided to pack up my car in February of last year, and my little dog Molly, who's the love of my life, sitting here beside me, we went and we traveled across Europe, and we drove 30,000 kilometers. And we lived in France and Spain and Italy and Portugal and Croatia. And then we visited other places like Slovenia and Liechtenstein and Austria and Switzerland and all of these other places throughout that year. And I spent much of it on my own, made lots of new friends, and had lots of family and friends visit at various different junctures along the way as well. But it was absolutely a wonderful experience. And I'm very fortunate that, because I'm not married and don't have any kids, I was able to do it and spend my 40th year traveling Europe, basically. So yeah, it was great.
Sounds wonderful. And I think, for anybody who is in that fortunate position to travel, you definitely should, because I'm sure it helps you do a lot of thinking as well over the year, and to experience different cultures and different languages, and just really catch up with humanity, I suppose.
100%. I just the anthropology, sitting in a cafe and just looking at people and seeing people interacting. And I had some incredible conversations with people who I just happened to sit beside in a coffee shop for 40 minutes, and then they were gone, and I will never see them again. But it was, there's some of the conversations that I'll always remember. But like I will say as well, a lot of people would say to me, "Oh, you're living the dream. How lucky you are." I think it's important to sort of state that there is no dream. Wherever you are, and wherever you are, you'll still wake up grumpy some days. You'll still wake up with a hangover. You'll still, have a difficult work day. There'll still be someone that will beep at you and piss you off. Though it's not. There's no such thing as an idyllic lifestyle. And I think, as much as I loved it, and don't get me wrong, I never complain about the time that I had, because I really enjoyed every minute. I think people sometimes have this very rose-tinted idea of what life on the continent might be like, and it's just like anywhere else. It's just like living life wherever you are. And that's, I think, is an important message as well. It's wonderful, but it's also just the same old bullshit, right?
Very good. Well, look, I want to change gears, because I want to squeeze in a couple of quick questions before we run out of time, Ariana.
Sure.
And one of the things I like to ask my guests is about life advice. Now, obviously, whether that's advice for solo powered people, or whether it's just more general advice. But when you think about advice that you've received over the years, or maybe advice that you often share with people, what springs to mind when I ask you that question?
I think, a lot of things that I talk about with my coaching clients, I kind of have touched on a lot of them already. What's the life you want to lead, and what is enough, what is too much. But I think another thing that I often talk to people about is just getting out of your own way. And the idea that often the biggest obstacle to us being able to do the things that we want to do is ourselves. And how, what I often say to people is to kind of personify your brain. You are not your thoughts. And personify your brain if you need to, and create different names for different parts of your brain. And if there is a business part of you that might be Simone Hodgkinson, then let Simone Hodgkinson come through and do whatever that part of your brain needs to do in order to be a successful business person, right? So often we can allow judgment, fear of judgment from others, or judgment of ourselves, stop us from living the life that we want to lead. And so I think we really need to push that negative part of our brains often out of the way, and not stop ourselves doing the things that we want to do because we're worried about what other people might think. Because I've seen that all too often in my coaching career, and as soon as I sort of convince my clients to get out of their own way, brilliant and wonderful things happen. So I think that's a really important life message for sure.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. I love the personify the various aspects of your brain. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to ask you is about inspiration. Now, obviously, you've done an awful lot of things and you're continuing to evolve. But when I ask you about things that inspire you, or people that have inspired you or that you look up to, what springs to mind when I ask you that question?
I mean, look, I very recently put up a post on my Instagram where I happened to meet Roisin Shortall and Holly Cairns, who are involved in the Social Democrats here in Ireland. Roisin Shortall founded the party a few years ago, and Holly Cairns is now the leader of the party. So just to speak up on Holly Cairns, why I find her inspirational is because, she just very recently got involved in politics. She only got involved during the marriage referendum and then did some canvassing around repeal the eighth. And she then got first elected to local government in 2018 and then got elected to the Dáil in 2019 and recently became elected as the leader of the party. She's just 33 years of age. She's a single young woman, and she's very passionate about not allowing the patriarchy or the kind of way in which we have sort of seen politics be performed, I suppose, over the last few years to stop her from being vocal about the things that she wants to be vocal about. For me, that's very inspiring story, because I think a lot of people stop themselves from getting involved in areas that they want to have a particular interest in because maybe they don't feel they have enough experience, or they're not the right age, or they don't have the right background, or they don't have the right connections. And actually, Holly's story, or people like Holly in that way, who kind of just decide that they want to, make the world a better place through their beliefs and through their passions, and they don't allow themselves to be stopped or to get anyone in their way. And they're the types of people that really inspire me. And, I'm toying with the idea of getting involved with the Social Democrats myself and potentially getting involved in politics, because I think, there's definitely a need for change in Ireland and a need for doing things differently. But yeah, I mean, I think, she's the most recent example of an inspirational person for me.
Well, that's a whole other podcast. I can see the next podcast being launched immediately. I watched with admiration at the News Agents podcast, which you may be familiar with, and how that just absolutely catapulted out of the gate, talking about modern day issues and government and politics and the news itself. And it's a huge area, but it obviously seems like you were inspired by some of that. So that's great. And the other thing I want to ask you is about the next 6, 9, 12 months, or even longer. I like to ask people about how they go about planning for their own life. Now, as a coach and as a consultant, I'm sure there's an awful lot of planning that you have to do for yourself, for your clients, etc. But what do you hope to achieve over the next year or so? What's on your horizon? How do you go about applying that to your own life and your own goals?
So, I mean, look, there's a couple of things, like, because I work for the magazine, and I've been really fortunate to set up my life in a way that allows me, again, to do the things that I want to do. So working for Irish Country magazine, I do a lot of travel writing for them, and I'm able to kind of go and explore Ireland. So after having traveled Europe last year, I sort of set myself the goal of trying to visit, all 32 counties in Ireland, and to really explore. I'm a very, very patriotic person. So to really explore all of that this island has to offer, rather than seeking beauty outside of it, right? So that was something that I wanted to do. I set myself a task of eating in Michelin restaurants in Dublin, because that's another big passion of mine, is food, right? So like, I have these quests, like these little quests that I set myself of like enjoyable things that I can do, whether that be with the magazine or with work or just with friends, right? So they're little kind of personal things that I'm enjoying doing at the moment. From a work perspective, I really enjoy working with Irish Country magazine and the team in there, and we have lots of plans within the magazine. We have the Irish Maid Awards, which we are in our 7th year this year, and looking at expanding that and doing some different things within the magazine. Obviously I'm taking over Mindstream well, I've been really doing it this year, but from August it's going to be entirely me. So there's a lot of plans that I have for that in terms of expanding that business and creating a lot more coaches to go out into the world to help other people to achieve their goals. I started doing a lot more weddings as well this year as well since I've come back. So I literally just had a consultation today with a guy who's getting married next year. So that's something that I really enjoy. It's just part of that. And then, growing and expanding the podcast. I mean, my 15th episode is coming out tomorrow. So it's really in its infancy, but I have such huge ambitions with it. I would love to get it sponsored. I would love to do more TV work, and I would really love to do more public speaking. But I'm also in talks about potentially having a baby over the next while. I'm 41 and I'm in talks with potentially having a baby on my own and exploring that. And I'm also thinking about getting into politics. So I'm in, it's like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next 12 to 24 months with my life. It's whatever's going to come along first, I think, and whatever makes me happiest. And I don't want to put all my eggs into one basket. I obviously clearly I'm not a person that does that. I like to have multiple baskets with multiple eggs, figuratively and literally, if you take the having a baby thing into account. So yeah, who knows? Look how excited I am, and that's what I want people to be about their life, is to be excited about the possibilities and to be excited about whatever direction that life will take us, and that we don't have to just live a boring life, or a life that maybe our parents or further back generations led, that we can now live a very, very millennial free life doing things that we want to do.
I love that, Ariana. Thank you for sharing that. I love as well the way you framed the beginning of when you were answering that question, because I don't think anybody's ever said to me that I set myself these little quests of things that I really want to enjoy and experience. And just framing it like that changes the whole perception of it, doesn't it? I really like that. And yeah, no, thank you so much indeed for sharing that in terms of how you plan and what's going on in your life. But it brings me nicely onto the last couple of things I wanted to ask you. One is, with all the things that we've discussed today and everything else that seems to be coming up this year, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to touch on, or maybe double down on, or any messages you want to leave us? And secondly, because there's lots of things going on in your world, if people want to catch up with you, listen to the podcast, find out what's happening with your business in a month or two's time, where do you want to point people to who are listening to this or watching this around the world?
I mean, I suppose to answer the first part of your question, I think one of the things that I talked about while on the 6 o'clock show the other night was around the idea of sort of solo living and being single by choice. And I think that got a very big response. And I had a lot of messages from people who reached out to me, thanking me for speaking out on behalf of single people. Because I think there is still quite a stigma attached to being a single person. And I think there is this idea that if you are single, you are inherently unhappy, and that you are searching for love, and that you spend your entire life looking for a partner, which is very much not the case for a vast majority of people. And I have a very interesting episode coming out tomorrow with Dr. Peter McGraw, who is a behavioral scientist over in the US with Colorado University, and he has his own podcast called Solo, A Single Person's Guide to Living an Extraordinary Life. And I think, for me, I think a lot more conversation needs to happen around the idea that the way in which society is set up, the way in which governments are set up, is very much with the family in mind, with the couple in mind. Even when we look at tax breaks that people get, I bought my apartment by myself. I wasn't given any help whatsoever. I definitely didn't have a bank of mom and dad or anything like that. I had to pay for everything and continue to pay for everything by myself, and don't get any sort of recognition for that. During COVID, I was a 38-year-old woman with a biological clock that was ticking away, and I wasn't allowed to interact with people outside of my household. It was illegal for me to have sex with someone who I didn't live with if I wanted to go and have a date or whatever, right? So there was no talk from a government perspective about single people and all of that. It was very much focused on the family, on children, on all of that kind of thing. But I think a lot of people sometimes have a negative relationship there can be a lot of abuse in a relationship. And I think a lot of times people are afraid to be single or to exit relationships because of a stigma that it is around that, or because of financial worries that lie around that. And, you know, this whole idea of the family, you know, about women having children on their own, or those things are still stigmatized in society. So for me, I think it's definitely a conversation that I want to have more of. It's definitely something that I want to speak on more, whether that be on television or radio or podcast or at different events, because I think, you know, 41% of people in Ireland are single, according to the last census, which I imagine will grow even bigger. 50% of people in America are single, and 1 in 2 of them are choosing to be single. So they're not sad and lonely. And I think, you know, that is often the perception. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that I would love to discuss more. And if anyone is interested in talking to me about any of the topics that I've talked about today, or working with me as a coach or a celebrant or anything, arianadunne.com, ARIANADUNNE is my website address. It's a very basic website, you know, I don't put a huge amount into it. My LinkedIn is where I'm very active, again, Ariana Dunne. My Instagram is ask_Ariana Dunne. And yeah, my podcast is solo powered, and it's available wherever you get your podcasts. So multiple ways in which you can find me.
Well, that brings us lovely to the end of this episode. Thanks so much indeed for sharing all your advice and all the insights that you've shared with us today here on the Global Discussion. Thanks to everybody who's been watching or listening to this episode around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe to everything that we're doing here. And of course, go immediately and listen to Solo Powered with Ariana Dunne. And I hope you'll join me back here for some more discussions with more creatives and leaders and thinkers. But thank you, Ariana. It has been wonderful to catch up with you today, and continued success with everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much.